The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window as I traced my fingers over the wedding dress hanging on my closet door. In less than 24 hours, I'd be walking down the aisle to marry the love of my life. Everything was perfect, or at least that's what I desperately wanted to believe. I'm Autumn, and this should have been the happiest morning of my life. Instead, my stomach was in knots as I prepared to face another breakfast with my future mother-in-law. Girl, you look like you're heading to a funeral, not your wedding rehearsal, Tessa said, barging into my room with 2 cups of coffee. My best friend had practically moved in this week to help with the preparations. Here, caffeine fixes everything. Thanks, I said, accepting the cup. I just can't shake this feeling that Mara's planning something. Your mother-in-law from hell? Tessa rolled her eyes. When isn't she planning something? The doorbell rang, and my heart skipped. Travis was early for breakfast. I hurried downstairs, nearly colliding with him in the hallway. His smile still made my knees weak, even after 3 years together. There's my beautiful bride, he said, pulling me into a kiss. Travis, darling. Mara's voice cut through our moment like a knife. She swept in behind him, uninvited as usual. Oh, Autumn, you're not dressed yet? And your hair? I forced a smile, very aware of my messy bun and yoga pants. Good morning, Mara. We weren't expecting you for another hour. Well, I thought I'd come early to help. There's so much to do, and we want everything to be... She paused, her eyes scanning our modest living room. Adequate. Travis squeezed my hand. Mom, please, we talked about this. About what? She blinked innocently. I'm only trying to help. After all, it's not every day my only son marries a... Another pointed pause. Well, let's have breakfast, shall we? Tessa appeared with a tray of freshly baked croissants. These just came out of the oven. Autumn made them herself. How quaint, Mara said, delicately picking one up. In our family, we usually have our staff handle the cooking. Well, in my family, we believe in doing things ourselves, I replied, my voice steady. Travis loves my baking, don't you, honey? Best croissants I've ever had, he said, grabbing one and taking a big bite. Mara's perfectly lined lips twitched. Yes, well, speaking of the wedding, I took the liberty of making some last-minute changes to the seating arrangement. What changes? I asked, my coffee cup freezing halfway to my mouth. Oh, just minor adjustments. I moved your cousin Rachel to the back. We can't have someone with blue hair in the primary wedding photos, can we? And your friend Jack, the one with the... She wrinkled her nose. Tattoos. He's now at the overflow table. Mom, Travis interjected, you can't just change things without asking? Darling, I'm only thinking of the family photos. They'll be in our albums forever. I set my cup down carefully. Mara, Rachel is my only remaining family since my parents passed. She's sitting at the main table, and that's final. The room went silent. Mara's eyes narrowed slightly, but her plastic smile remained fixed. Of course, dear. It was merely a suggestion. Though I must say, if you're going to take that tone with me, perhaps we should discuss your choice of wedding dress again. That off-the-rack number is hardly befitting a Garcia bride. The dress is perfect, Tessa cut in, and it's already altered. We'll see, Mara murmured, so quietly I almost missed it. Travis checked his watch. Mom, we should head to the venue. The rehearsal starts in an hour. He kissed my cheek. See you there, babe. As they left, Tessa grabbed my arm. Did you hear what she said about the dress? Autumn, I don't trust her. Neither do I admitted, watching through the window as Travis helped his mother into her Mercedes. But what can she possibly do? The dress is locked safely in my closet, and tomorrow I'm marrying the man I love. Just be careful, Tessa warned. That woman has more schemes than a soap opera villain. I nodded, trying to ignore the growing unease in my stomach. Tomorrow was my wedding day, and nothing, Not even Mara Garcia was going to ruin it. At least that's what I thought at the time. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, I'd be facing the biggest crisis of my life, or that karma was about to teach my future mother-in-law an unforgettable lesson. No, 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 my scream echoed through the bridal suite as I stared at the garment bag in horror. Where my beautiful wedding dress should have been hung, what looked like a thrift store reject, yellowed, stained, and at least 3 decades old. What's wrong? Tessa burst through the door, still in her robe. The other bridesmaids crowded behind her. My hands shook as I unzipped the bag completely. My dress? It's gone. This this thing is in its place. That's impossible, Tessa said, rushing to my side. I saw you hang it up last night after the rehearsal dinner. You double-checked everything. A soft knock at the door made us all jump. Just checking if the bride is ready to start getting dressed. Mara's sickeningly sweet voice called out. Don't let her in, I whispered to Tessa, but it was too late. Mara glided into the room, immaculate in her designer outfit. Oh my, she gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. What happened to your dress, dear? The false concern in her voice made my blood boil. You know exactly what happened. Are you suggesting I had something to do with this? Mara's eyes widened in mock offense. Really, Autumn, your paranoia is showing. Perhaps this is a sign that you're not ready to join our family. Stop it, I snapped, stepping closer to her. Where is my dress? How should I know? Though, I must say, this older dress might be more appropriate for someone of your background. We can't all afford couture, can we? Tessa grabbed my arm before I could respond. I'm calling the police. Over a missing dress? Mara laughed. Don't be dramatic. The ceremony starts in 3 hours. Maybe you should focus on finding something else to wear instead of throwing around baseless accusations. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. Oh, and Autumn, do try to keep this little incident quiet. We wouldn't want to upset Travis on his big day, would we? The door clicked shut behind her, and I collapsed into a chair, fighting back tears. That witch, Tessa fumed, pacing the room. She must have gotten a copy of the key card somehow. I bet she has the dress hidden somewhere. We don't have time to search the whole venue, I said, my voice hollow. And she's right. We can't tell Travis. He's already stressed about his father not being here. Then we fight back, Tessa declared, pulling out her phone. Remember that boutique owner I told you about? Jasmine? She owes me a favor, and she's known for working miracles. A boutique owner can't help us now, I said, staring at the ruined dress. The ceremony's in 3 hours. Trust me, Tessa insisted, already dialing. Jasmine isn't just any boutique owner. She's— Another knock interrupted us. The wedding planner, Yvette, poked her head in. Everything okay? I just saw Mara looking rather pleased with herself. No, everything is not okay, Tessa exploded, explaining the situation. Yvette's face darkened. I've worked hundreds of weddings, but I've never seen a mother-in-law stoop this low. Want me to accidentally spill red wine on her dress? Despite everything, I laughed. No, we need to be smarter than that. An idea began forming in my mind. Tessa, make that call. Yvette, I need you to keep Mara busy. Give her some crisis to manage. Something about the catering, maybe? On it, Yvette said with a wink. I can stage quite a convincing meltdown about the wrong appetizers being delivered. As they sprang into action, I stood up and faced the mirror. My reflection showed a woman on the edge of either a breakdown or a breakthrough. Mara wanted to humiliate me, to prove I didn't belong in her perfect world, but she had no idea who she was dealing with. Jasmine's on her way, Tessa announced, ending her call. She says to tell you she's bringing reinforcements. I nodded, a calm determination replacing my panic. Good, because we're not just going to fix this. We're going to make sure Mara never forgets this day. What are you planning? Tessa asked, a slow smile spreading across her face. Let's just say, I replied, picking up the ruined dress, Karma's about to make a very fashionable entrance. The next 3 hours would either make or break my wedding day. But as I heard Yvette's voice down the hall, already launching into her performance about mixed-up food orders, I felt a surge of hope. Mara thought she had won, but she was about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating the wrong bride. The bridal suite door burst open exactly 20 minutes later, revealing a striking woman in her 40s wheeling a large garment bag. Behind her, a tall man struggled with what looked like a mobile workshop of sewing supplies. So, we have a mother-in-law situation? Jasmine asked, sweeping into the room like a force of nature. Her eyes fell on the ruined dress and narrowed. Oh, this is personal. Jasmine, thank you for coming. Tessa rushed forward. This is Autumn. Darling, save the thanks. When Tessa told me what happened, I canceled 3 appointments. No one ruins a bride's day on my watch. She turned to her assistant. Asher, set up over there. We have 2 hours and 40 minutes. I watched in amazement as Asher transformed a corner of the suite into a mini atelier, complete with a portable sewing machine and what seemed like endless supplies. Now, Jasmine said, unzipping her garment bag, let's see what we have to work with. She pulled out something that made my jaw drop, a stunning white gown that seemed to shimmer in the light. That's a Jasmine Clark original, I gasped, finally recognizing her. You're the Jasmine Clark? The one and only, she winked. And this is just the beginning. Asher, the lace panels. But these dresses cost a fortune, I protested. I can't possibly… Stop right there. Jasmine held up a hand. Your mother worked for me for 15 years. Sarah was more than an employee. She was family. When Tessa mentioned your name, I knew exactly who you were. Tears welled in my eyes at the mention of my mother. You knew her? She was my head seamstress until the accident, and she would be damned if she let some stuck-up society woman ruin her daughter's wedding day. Jasmine's eyes softened. Now, let's make some magic. The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. Jasmine and Asher worked with incredible precision, transforming the dress while Tessa ran interference, keeping curious bridesmaids at bay. Through the door, we could hear Yvette still orchestrating her catering crisis, keeping Mara thoroughly distracted. Almost there, Jasmine muttered, making minute adjustments. Asher, the pearl detailing. A knock at the door made us all freeze. Autumn? It's Travis. Mom said something about problems with your dress? My heart stopped. Just a minor issue, honey. Everything's fine. Are you sure? I can help. No, we all shouted in unison. It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding, Tessa called out, shooting me a panicked look. Okay, Travis sounded uncertain. But if you need anything… She's in good hands, Jasmine called out, putting the final touches on the dress. Your bride will be ready on time, Mr. Garcia. After his footsteps faded, I turned to the mirror and gasped. The dress was beyond anything I could have imagined. The original gown had been transformed with delicate lace overlays and hand-sewn pearl details that caught the light with every movement. There's just one thing missing, Jasmine said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small, vintage-looking hair clip. Your mother wore this at her wedding. She left it with me for safekeeping, saying someday it would be yours. My hands trembled as I took the clip. I thought all her things were lost in the move after… She knew what she was doing, Jasmine smiled. Now, let's get you into this dress. We have a mother-in-law to educate about karma. As Tessa and Jasmine helped me into the gown, Asher peeked out the door. Heads up, the dragon lady is heading this way, and she looks smug. Perfect timing, Jasmine said, making a final adjustment. Autumn, are you ready? I stood tall, feeling the smooth fabric settle around me. More than ready. Remember, Jasmine whispered, the best revenge isn't just about getting even. It's about rising above while looking absolutely fabulous. The door handle turned, and I could practically feel Mara's anticipation of my humiliation on the other side. But as I caught my reflection one last time, I knew she was in for a surprise. The woman in the mirror wasn't a victim. She was a vision, and she was about to teach her future mother-in-law an unforgettable lesson about messing with the wrong bride. Places, everyone, Jasmine commanded softly. It's showtime. Mara's face as she entered the room was a study in shock. Her perfectly painted mouth fell open, and for once, she seemed completely lost for words. Oh, Mara, I exclaimed with fake brightness. I'm so glad you're here. I wanted to thank you. Thank me? She stammered, her eyes fixed on my transformed dress. Yes, if you hadn't pointed out the issues with my original dress, I never would have had the opportunity to wear this. I turned slowly, letting the fabric catch the light. It's a Jasmine Clark original. You do know Jasmine Clark, don't you? Jasmine stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. Mara, what a pleasure. I don't believe we've met, though I've heard so much about you. The color drained from Mara's face. Jasmine Clark. But how? Why are you? Let's just say I have a personal interest in ensuring Autumn has the perfect wedding day, Jasmine replied smoothly. Though I am curious about what happened to her original dress. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you? Mara's composure cracked slightly. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Really? I moved closer to her, my voice low. Because the security cameras in the hallway might tell a different story. Should we ask the venue manager to check the footage? Are you threatening me? Mara hissed, but I caught the flicker of fear in her eyes. Not at all. I'm simply making conversation. Oh, and I should mention, Jasmine's dress designs are quite popular with the society magazines. I'm sure they'll be very interested in featuring today's wedding. Tessa, catching on immediately, chimed in. Oh yes, I've already had 3 photographers ask about getting exclusive shots of the bride. They're especially interested in family photos. Mara's hands clenched at her sides. You wouldn't dare make a spectacle of this. Make a spectacle? I laughed softly. But isn't that exactly what you wanted? Though perhaps not quite the kind you had in mind. A knock at the door interrupted us. Yvette poked her head in. 5-minute warning, everyone. Oh, Mrs. Garcia, the catering crisis has been resolved. Though we did have to make some last-minute changes to the seating arrangement to accommodate the photographer from Vogue. Vogue, Mara whispered, looking faint. Don't worry, I said sweetly. I'm sure you'll photograph beautifully, though you might want to touch up your makeup. You look a little pale. Mara turned on her heel and fled the room, nearly colliding with Asher in the doorway. That, Tessa declared, was magnificent, but our triumph was short-lived. As Jasmine made a final inspection of the dress, her face suddenly tensed. We have a problem. The back closure, there's a crucial hook missing. Without it, the dress won't stay properly secured during the ceremony. Can't we just pin it? Tessa suggested desperately. Not with this fabric. Jasmine shook her head. We need a specific type of closure, and we're out of time. My heart sank. After everything, was Mara going to win after all? Wait, Asher said suddenly. That vintage clip in your hair, could we modify it? Jasmine's eyes lit up. Autumn, may I see your mother's clip? I carefully removed it from my hair, my hands shaking slightly as I handed it over. Jasmine examined it closely, then smiled. This is perfect, Asher, my tools. Working with incredible speed, Jasmine modified the clip into an elegant closure that not only secured the dress, but added an extra touch of vintage beauty to the design. Your mother, she said softly as she worked, always said that sometimes the best solutions are hidden in plain sight. There, it's done. I blinked back tears as I felt the dress settle perfectly into place. My mother's clip, transformed just like the dress, would help me walk down the aisle. Places, everyone, Yvette called from the doorway. We're ready to begin. As my bridesmaids hurried to line up, Jasmine squeezed my hand. Remember, darling, you're not just wearing a dress. You're wearing your mother's love, my art, and your own strength. Now go show Mara what real class looks like. I took a deep breath and moved toward the door. In just a few minutes, I would walk down the aisle to marry Travis. And his mother? Well, she was about to learn that some lessons come wrapped in silk and lace. Ready? Tessa whispered, handing me my bouquet. I nodded, feeling stronger than ever, ready to make history. The hallway outside the ceremony space buzzed with last-minute activity. As I waited for my cue, I overheard raised voices around the corner. I recognized them immediately, Travis and Mara. Mom, what did you do? Travis's voice was sharp with anger. I don't know what you're talking about, Mara replied, but her voice wavered. Don't lie to me. The venue manager just showed me the security footage. I saw you sneaking into the bridal suite last night with a garment bag. My heart pounded. Someone had already shown Travis the footage? Darling, I was just trying to protect you, Mara pleaded. That girl, she's not from our world. She'll never understand our way of life. Our way of life? Travis's laugh was bitter. You mean looking down on everyone else? Treating people like they're beneath us? That's not my way of life, Mom. That's yours. Everything I've done has been for you. No, Travis cut her off. Everything you've done has been about control, just like with Dad. The silence that followed was deafening. Don't you dare bring your father into this, Mara hissed. Why not? Isn't this exactly why he left? Because you tried to control every aspect of his life until he couldn't take it anymore? I pressed myself against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. In 3 years, Travis had never spoken about his father's departure. Your father was weak, Mara spat. He chose to walk away from everything we built. No, Mom. He chose freedom over your manipulation. And if you don't stop this now, if you don't accept Autumn and treat her with respect, you're going to lose me too. Footsteps approached, and I quickly moved away from the wall, pretending to adjust my dress. Travis rounded the corner, stopping short when he saw me. Autumn, he breathed, taking in the dress. You look incredible. You're not supposed to see me before the ceremony, I said softly. He stepped closer, his eyes suspiciously bright. I'm so sorry about my mother. I had no idea she would. Hey, I touched his cheek. This isn't your fault. But it is. I should have seen it coming. I should have protected you. Travis, I met his eyes. I don't need protection. What I need is a partner who stands by me, and that's exactly what you just did. A throat cleared behind us. Jasmine stood there, looking elegant and authoritative. As touching as this is, we have a wedding to start. Travis, your place is at the altar. Autumn, let's get you in position. As Travis reluctantly headed toward the ceremony space, Jasmine adjusted my dress one final time. The photographers are ready. Mara won't know what hit her. I heard everything, I whispered, about Travis's father. Ah, yes, Jasmine nodded. Robert Garcia, a good man who finally had enough of Mara's games. Sometimes the kindest people take the longest to reach their breaking point. The wedding march began to play softly. That's your cue, Jasmine said, stepping back. Show them what real grace looks like. I took my position, clutching my bouquet. Through the doors, I could see the packed ceremony space. cameras discreetly positioned to capture every moment. Mara sat in the front row, her face a mask of barely contained fury. The doors opened fully, and every head turned. I heard the collective gasp as people took in the dress. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the photographer's cameras clicking rapidly, but my focus was entirely on Travis, standing at the altar with tears in his eyes and the proudest smile I'd ever seen. Each step down the aisle felt like a victory. The dress moved like liquid silver, my mother's transformed clip securing everything perfectly. As I passed Mara, I caught her eye and gave her my sweetest smile. "You look beautiful," Travis whispered as I reached him. "Thanks to your mother," I whispered back, just loud enough for Mara to hear. If she hadn't helped create this situation, I never would have had the chance to wear a Jasmine Clark original. I suppose we should thank her. From her seat, Mara's face turned an interesting shade of purple. But as the officiant began to speak, I noticed something else. Behind her carefully maintained facade, there was fear. She was finally realizing that her actions hadn't just failed to humiliate me, they had backfired spectacularly, and we were just getting started. The ceremony began, but this was more than just a wedding now. It was a statement about standing up to bullies, about rising above pettiness, and about the way karma sometimes arrives wearing couture. The ceremony flowed perfectly into the reception, where the real show was about to begin. As Travis and I made our entrance into the beautifully decorated hall, the photographer from Vogue approached us. "Mrs. Garcia," she addressed me, deliberately using my new surname, "would you mind if we did a special feature on your dress? It's causing quite a buzz already." "Of course," I smiled, catching Mara's expression darkening from across the room, though the real story behind it is quite interesting. "Oh?" The photographer leaned in, pen poised over her notebook. "Yes, you see, my original dress mysteriously disappeared this morning, but then something magical happened." "Autumn," Mara interrupted, appearing suddenly at my side. "Perhaps this isn't the best time for interviews." "Nonsense," Jasmine's voice rang out as she joined our group. "Every bride should share her special story, especially when it involves one of my emergency wedding dress rescues." The photographer's eyes widened. "Jasmine Clark, you designed this dress? In record time, too." Jasmine nodded. "Though we should really thank Autumn's mother-in-law. If she hadn't created such an urgent situation, we might never have collaborated on this piece." "What exactly do you mean by urgent situation?" the photographer asked, scribbling furiously. Mara's face paled. "I'm sure no one wants to hear about boring wedding day mishaps." "Oh, but they do," Tessa chimed in, smartphone in hand. "In fact, the video of you sneaking into the bridal suite last night is already getting attention on social media." "Video?" Mara choked out. "The venue's security footage," Travis said coldly. "Very clear quality, actually." The photographer was practically salivating. "So this was more than just a last-minute dress change?" "Actually," I said sweetly, "it's a beautiful story about overcoming adversity, about how sometimes when people try to tear you down, fate sends you angels instead." I gestured to Jasmine. "Would you like to hear about my mother's connection to Jasmine Clark?" "Don't you dare," Mara hissed under her breath. "Is there a problem, Mara?" I asked loudly enough for nearby guests to turn their heads. "You seem upset, almost as upset as when you discovered your plan to humiliate me backfired." The photographer's pen flew across her notebook. Mara looked around desperately, realizing she was trapped in a situation of her own making. I I need some air," she stammered, turning to flee. "Before you go," Jasmine called after her, "you should know that this dress will be featured in our upcoming collection. We're calling it the Phoenix, Beauty Rising from Attempted Destruction. Poetic, isn't it?" Mara froze mid-step, her shoulders stiffening. "Oh, and Mara," I added. The original dress you took? It was a decoy. We suspected you might try something like this, so we kept the real one somewhere safe. But thanks to you, I ended up with something even better. The look on her face was priceless as she fled the reception hall. Several guests whispered and pointed, the story already spreading through the crowd. That, the photographer said, is going to make one hell of a feature. Travis pulled me close. You knew she would try to sabotage the dress? Let's just say I learned from the best, I smiled, nodding toward Jasmine. Your mother isn't the only one who can plan ahead. Speaking of planning, Jasmine interjected, I believe it's time for the mother-son dance, though it seems we're missing half of the pair. Travis looked toward the door his mother had fled through, then back at me. I think I know someone more deserving of that dance. He turned to Jasmine and extended his hand. Would you do me the honor? You've been more of a mother figure today than mine has been in years. Jasmine's composed facade cracked slightly, genuine emotion showing through. I would be delighted. As they moved to the dance floor, Tessa appeared at my side. Mission accomplished? Almost, I said, watching Travis and Jasmine dance while photographers captured the moment. But I think Karma has one more surprise in store for Mara. What do you mean? I smiled, thinking of the envelope in my purse, the one containing a letter from Travis's father that had arrived this morning. Let's just say the universe has perfect timing. The reception continued, a celebration not just of love, but of justice served with elegance and style. And somewhere in the venue, Mara was learning the hard way that some battles aren't worth fighting, especially against a bride who refuses to be broken. Mara's return to the reception was like a thundercloud rolling in. She marched straight to the microphone just as Travis and I finished our first dance, her face set with grim determination. I'd like to make a toast, she announced, her voice carrying across the now silent room. To my son and his bride. Travis tensed beside me. Mom, don't. You see, Mara continued, ignoring him, I've been trying to protect this family's reputation, and there's something everyone should know about Autumn's background. Actually, I cut in, reaching for my purse. Before you continue, there's something you might want to read first. I pulled out the envelope I'd been saving. I'm speaking now, Mara snapped. Is that any way to talk about family? A deep voice called from the back of the room. The crowd parted, and there stood Robert, Travis's father, looking distinguished in a perfectly tailored suit. Dad? Travis breathed. Robert? Mara's voice cracked, the microphone picking up her shock. What are you doing here? I invited him, I said, walking toward her with the envelope. After he sent this letter explaining everything, Mara's hands shook as she took the envelope. The room was dead silent as she read, her face growing paler with each line. You knew? She whispered. All this time, you knew? That you forged Robert's signature on those divorce papers 3 years ago? That you intercepted his letters to Travis? Yes, I knew. I turned to address the stunned crowd. You see, Mara wasn't just trying to ruin my wedding day. She's been manipulating this family for years. That's a lie. Mara grabbed the microphone again, but Robert stepped forward. Is it, Mara? Should we discuss the offshore account you created in my name? The one you used to make it look like I'd abandoned our son for money? Travis moved to stand beside his father, his voice thick with emotion. All those times you said he chose to leave us? I did it for you, Mara cried. He would have ruined everything with his ridiculous ideas about living a simple life. No, Mom, Travis said firmly. You did it for yourself. Just like trying to ruin Autumn's wedding dress. It's always been about control. How dare you, Mara sputtered, after everything I've sacrificed. The only thing you've sacrificed, Jasmine interrupted, stepping forward, is your relationship with your son. And for what? To maintain some illusion of social superiority? The photographer from Vogue was scribbling frantically, while several guests not so discreetly recorded the scene on their phones. This is all your fault, Mara pointed at me accusingly. You turned my son against me. No, Mara, I replied calmly. You did that all on your own. I just helped bring the truth to light. You see, when you tried to dig up dirt on my background, you missed something important. I worked as a private investigator's assistant through college. Finding evidence of your schemes wasn't that difficult. Mara's face contorted with rage. She lunged forward, but Tessa was quicker, accidentally on purpose spilling a full glass of red wine down the front of Mara's designer dress. Oops, Tessa said innocently. How clumsy of me. Security, Yvette called out smoothly. I believe Mrs. Garcia needs some assistance finding the exit. As two security guards approached, Mara looked around wildly, finally realizing she had lost everything: her control, her reputation, and most importantly, her son's trust. Travis, she pleaded one last time, you can't believe these lies. They're not lies, Mom. I've seen the evidence. He turned to his father. Dad, I think we have a lot to talk about. We do, son, Robert agreed, placing a hand on Travis's shoulder. Starting with my real reason for stepping back from the family business, which your mother conveniently forgot to mention involved starting a charitable foundation. As security escorted a protesting Mara out, the tension in the room broke. Guests began talking excitedly, the story spreading like wildfire. The Vogue photographer was already on her phone, presumably calling in what had just become a much bigger story than a simple wedding feature. Well, Jasmine said, appearing beside me with a champagne flute, I'd say Karma just made quite a spectacular entrance. I watched as Travis embraced his father, years of misunderstandings finally clearing up. Sometimes karma needs a little help finding its way. Indeed, she smiled, though I must say, that private investigator detail was a brilliant touch. Who says it was just a detail? I winked, clinking my glass against hers. The reception resumed, but now with an air of celebration that went beyond just a wedding. It was a celebration of truth, justice, and the power of standing up to those who would try to break us. And somewhere in the city, Mara was learning that some stains, like karma and red wine, never really wash out. As the evening wound down, Travis and I slipped away to the venue's garden terrace. The fairy lights twinkled above us, and the faint sound of music drifted through the open doors. So, Travis said, loosening his tie, my new wife is a part-time private investigator who orchestrated an elaborate plan to expose my mother's schemes, all while pulling off the wedding of the century. Disappointed? I asked, leaning against the balustrade. He pulled me close. Are you kidding? I'm in awe. Though I do have one question. How did you find my father? Actually, he found me, I admitted. Remember that charity gala last month? He was there, saw our engagement announcement in the society pages. He reached out, and once we started talking, I shrugged. The pieces fell into place. And the security footage of Mom stealing the dress? Yvette's idea. She had a feeling Mara might try something dramatic. The terrace doors opened, and Robert stepped out, followed by Jasmine. Hope we're not interrupting, Robert said, but there's something you both should know. He glanced at Jasmine, who nodded encouragingly. I'm reinstating Travis as the foundation's director, if he wants it. Travis straightened. The youth education program? The one Mom said was a waste of resources? The very same, though it's grown quite a bit, thanks to a certain designer's contributions. Robert smiled at Jasmine. We've been working together for years, Jasmine explained, supporting underprivileged students in fashion and business programs. Your mother never approved, of course. That's why you really came today, isn't it? I asked. Not just because of my mother's connection. Guilty. Jasmine admitted. When Robert mentioned you were marrying Travis, it felt like fate, though I certainly didn't expect to be designing a wedding dress at the last minute. Speaking of unexpected, Tessa's voice called as she joined us. You might want to see this. She held up her phone, showing a social media post going viral. It was the security footage of Mara stealing the dress, paired with photos of the final result. The internet has officially dubbed it Karma's wedding dress. Tessa grinned. You're trending. Great, I groaned. Just what Mara needs, more ammunition. Actually, Robert said, checking his own phone. Mara just boarded a flight to Europe. First class, naturally. She left a message saying she needs time to reflect on her choices. Travis let out a long breath. Good. Maybe some distance will help her realize what really matters. And what matters to you? Robert asked softly. About the foundation? Travis looked at me, and I squeezed his hand encouragingly. I want in, he said firmly. All in, but with one condition. Autumn gets to be part of it too. Her investigative skills could help us identify families who need support but might be hesitant to ask. Perfect, Jasmine beamed. And while you're at it, perhaps we could discuss a scholarship program for aspiring fashion designers in honor of your mother, Autumn. I blinked back tears. She would have loved that. The sound of camera shutters made us turn. The Vogue photographer stood in the doorway, looking apologetic. Sorry to interrupt, but this is perfect. The next generation of philanthropy, fashion, and family coming together. May I? We posed for a few photos, but these weren't the stiff, formal shots Mara had always insisted on. These were natural, joyful moments of a family being rebuilt on a foundation of truth and purpose. As the party inside began to wind down, Travis pulled me onto the terrace's small dance floor for one last dance. You know what I realized? He murmured. Mom always said she was protecting our family's legacy, but she never understood what that legacy really was. And what is it? He gestured to where Robert and Jasmine were deep in discussion about scholarship programs, to Tessa showing Yvette the viral posts, to the evidence of love and support all around us. This, not the money or the status, but the ability to make a real difference, to build something meaningful. I rested my head on his shoulder, thinking of my mother's clip that had helped save the day, of Jasmine's unexpected connection, of Karma's perfect timing. You know what they say, I smiled. The best revenge isn't just getting even. It's living well, he finished, then kissed me under the twinkling lights. Inside, the band played their final song. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and probably a few viral memes about karma and wedding dresses. But tonight, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. Sometimes karma doesn't just come full circle, it creates an entirely new one, stronger and more beautiful than before.
You know, some days feel like they're smeared with gray from start to finish. Today, my 39th birthday, was exactly one of those. Waking up with the dull ache that's my faithful companion, I didn't feel much like celebrating. My name's Eliza, and I've been battling this damned illness since I was a kid. My condition's a tricky beast, keeping me tethered to a slew of doctors and this fancy private clinic I've been visiting since forever. Good thing I've made something of myself despite the odds, a thriving business that's all mine. But let's be honest, money's great, but it's no company on cold evenings. So there I was, back at the clinic for what felt like the millionth time, just to get myself checked and patched up, hoping to keep the beast at bay. And that's where I bumped into Jacob again. He's this nurse, you see, 5 years younger and looks like he stepped out of some glossy magazine, charming enough to make any woman look twice, sick or not. Happy birthday, Eliza, Jacob greeted me with that grin that somehow knew more than it should. He was leaning casually against the nurse's station, looking like he didn't have a care in the world. Thanks, I muttered, not really in the mood for chit-chat. I was more focused on getting through the day without any new bad news. Jacob seemed to pick up on my mood. He strolled over, all confidence and warm eyes. "Hey, don't look so glum. It's your birthday, isn't it? We should celebrate," he suggested, his voice smooth as silk. "Celebrate?" With more poking and prodding, I said, half joking but mostly serious. "Thanks, but I'd rather just get this over with." Jacob laughed, the sound easy and genuine. "Come on, Eliza. It's not every day you turn 39. Let me at least snag you a decent coffee from that cafe you like, my treat." Maybe it was the birthday blues or just the tiredness seeping into my bones, but I found myself nodding. "All right, Jacob. Coffee sounds good," I admitted, allowing a small smile to escape. We walked to the clinic's little cafe area, and as Jacob went off to order, I found a quiet corner to settle into. The thing about Jacob was that he always seemed genuinely cheerful, a stark contrast to the sterile whites and blues of the clinic. He'd been hitting on me since the first time I was admitted for an extended stay, always respectful but persistent as hell. Returning with 2 cups, Jacob handed one to me, his eyes never straying. "Eliza, you're one of the toughest people I know. This illness, it's part of you, but it ain't all of you. You've built a life, a business. That's not nothing." His words, blunt and simple, struck a chord. Maybe it was his straightforwardness, or maybe I was just vulnerable, but it felt good to be seen beyond the patient file. I chuckled, shaking my head slightly. "You always this optimistic?" "With you, always. You make it easy to believe in better days," he replied, his voice low and intimate. I don't know why I let my guard down. Maybe it was the birthday magic or Jacob's relentless charm, but as we sat there, talking and laughing over mediocre hospital cafe coffee, I felt lighter than I had in years. Discharged from the clinic and back in the swing of my daily routine, I thought the surprises were over. Then Jacob called. "Hey, Eliza, it's Jacob. How about dinner tonight? Just as friends, if you like." I hesitated, still riding the high of our last conversation. Sure, why not? I found myself saying, a little thrill of excitement making my stomach flutter. Jacob picked me up that evening, and he looked every bit the dashing nurse outside his scrubs, jeans, a crisp shirt, and that same disarming smile. As he drove us to a cozy little Italian place he knew, the air between us was charged, filled with the promise of something new. Over dinner, Jacob didn't waste any time. Between bites of spaghetti, he leaned in, his eyes serious. "Eliza, I've been thinking, why not give this a shot? You and me." I nearly choked on my pasta. "Jacob, you know my situation, my health. It's complicated. I can't have a normal relationship." Jacob reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "I don't care about that," he said firmly. "I love you for who you are, not for what you can or can't do. Plus, you deserve to be happy. Everyone does." His words were a balm, soothing the fears that always lurked in the back of my mind. How could I not be moved? "Okay, let's give it a try," I agreed, feeling a mixture of joy and terror. Dating Jacob was like a breath of fresh air. He made everything fun, even a simple walk in the park felt like an adventure. He had this knack for making me laugh, and for the first time in a long while, I forgot about my illness. I was just Eliza, not Eliza with a chronic condition. 6 months flew by in a blur of happiness, and then, out of the blue, Jacob proposed. We were at home, a simple night in, when he got down on one knee with a small, elegant ring. "Marry me, Eliza. Let's make this official." Tears welled up in my eyes as I nodded vigorously. "Yes, Jacob. Yes." But practicality kicked in soon after, and I knew we had to sort out some legal stuff first. "Jacob, I want a prenup. It's important to me," I told him one evening, my voice steady despite the fluttering in my chest. Jacob didn't blink an eye. "Whatever you need to feel secure, I'm on board." Jacob signed the document without another word, his signature swift and sure. Our wedding was modest, held at the city hall with just a handful of friends as witnesses. Afterward, we moved into my plush apartment in the city center. For the first time in my life, I felt truly at ease, truly loved. And in those moments, my illness and its shadows seemed very far away indeed. Life as a newlywed started off better than I could have imagined. Jacob and I were settling into our daily routines, and I felt like I was living in a dream. That was until a few months after the wedding when Jacob dropped a bombshell after a particularly quiet dinner. Eliza, I've been thinking a lot about this, and I've decided to quit my job, Jacob said abruptly, his tone serious as he avoided my gaze. I almost dropped my fork. Quit your job? Why all of a sudden? You love nursing, I responded, trying to keep the surprise out of my voice. Jacob sighed, pushing his plate away. I'm tired, Eliza. Tired of dealing with sickness every day. It's draining, you know. He looked up at me, his eyes searching for understanding. I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. I get it, love. But what will you do? He smiled then, a slow spread across his face. I was thinking I could take care of the house, cook for us, make things nice here. Wouldn't that be something? I paused, considering. It wasn't a typical arrangement, sure, but Jacob's cooking was divine, and he had a knack for making our place look like it belonged in a magazine. If that's what you want, I'm all for it, I finally said, giving his idea my blessing. True to his word, Jacob transformed into the perfect homemaker. Each evening I came home to a spotless apartment and the aroma of something delicious wafting through the air. Dinners were elaborate affairs, and Jacob always made sure to dress up the table like we were dining at a 5-star restaurant. I felt pampered, cherished, like a goddess. Darling, you've outdone yourself again, I exclaimed one night as I took a bite of the exquisite beef bourguignon he had prepared. Jacob, beaming with pride, filled my wine glass. Only the best for my best girl, he replied, winking at me across the table. This bliss, however, gradually started to fade. A year into our marriage, I noticed a shift. Jacob began spending more and more time in his office, his excuses ready whenever I asked. Just sorting some bills or planning something special for us, he would say. I tried to shake the nagging feeling that something was off. The apartment was still immaculate, the dinners still delicious, but the man who used to sit and chat with me for hours was slowly retreating behind a closed door. One evening, unable to shake my sense of unease, I confronted him. Jacob, we need to talk. You've been so distant lately. Is everything okay? He looked up from his computer, surprised. Everything's fine, Eliza. You're imagining things, he reassured me, his voice gentle yet dismissive. But you're always locked away in here. We hardly talk anymore. Don't you miss how things used to be? I pressed, feeling the frustration rise. Jacob stood and came over to where I was sitting, his hands on my shoulders. Eliza, I love you. Nothing's changed. I'm just managing some stuff to keep our lives running smoothly. Trust me, okay? I wanted to believe him, to brush off the doubts and fall into his reassurance. Okay? I trust you, I murmured, though the pit in my stomach told me not to dismiss my feelings so quickly. It was supposed to be a surprise. I planned to leave work early, cook dinner for Jacob, and maybe rekindle some of that old spark. I was practically buzzing as I turned my key in the lock, ready for a quiet evening with my husband. What I wasn't ready for was the scene that greeted me. In the kitchen, a middle-aged woman, whom I had never seen before, was bustling around, chopping vegetables and stirring pots. My heart sank. Excuse me, who are you? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. The woman turned, a look of confusion crossing her face. Oh, you must be Mrs. Eliza. I'm Helen. I've been cooking and cleaning here for over a year now, she said, as if that explained everything. A year? My voice cracked. And who hired you? Your husband, madam. He said it would ease your burdens. Helen replied, returning her focus to the bubbling pot on the stove. I felt like the floor was slipping away under me. Thank you, Helen. That will be all for today. I'll handle it from here, I managed to say, keeping my tone even. Once Helen left, the silence of the apartment pounded in my ears. I sat down, trying to process everything. Where was Jacob if not here taking care of things as he claimed? The next day, I contacted a private detective. It was something out of a TV show, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I needed to know what Jacob was doing. The detective's report came back faster than I expected. Jacob had been gambling, not just casual poker nights with friends, but high-stakes games at a casino downtown. He was in debt, big time. When I confronted him that evening, he didn't even try to deny it. His face crumpled when he saw the detective's photos and reports scattered across the coffee table. Eliza, I can explain, Jacob stammered, his eyes not meeting mine. Explain, Jacob, you waste our money. My voice rose, a mix of anger and heartbreak. Jacob's shoulders slumped. I know it's bad. I started going to the casino just to blow off some steam. But it got out of hand. I'm so sorry, Eliza. Sorry doesn't fix this, Jacob. I was trying to stay calm, but the betrayal stung deep. You have debts because of your gambling. How much are we talking about? He hesitated, then mumbled, 70,000. There was a long, heavy pause. Then, I made up my mind. I will pay off your debts this one time. But under 2 conditions: you seek treatment for your gambling addiction, and you sign a receipt acknowledging that I have paid this debt. Treatment, yes, I'll do it. Anything you say. And I'll sign whatever you need me to. Jacob rushed the words out, relief fleeting across his face. I arranged everything quickly. The debt was cleared, and Jacob started his therapy. He signed the receipt, his hand shaking slightly as he put pen to paper. A whole year had ticked by since I'd bailed Jacob out of his gambling debts and watched him walk into that rehab center. He'd come back seemingly changed, dedicated to our fresh start, or so I thought. That illusion shattered the day I came home to find not just Jacob, but his sister Linda and her 3 kids surrounded by suitcases and boxes in my living room. What's all this? I asked, my tone icy as I dropped my keys and bag on the hall table, taking in the chaotic scene. Linda, who had the nerve to look right at home, smirked as she straightened up from unpacking a box. Oh, Eliza, we're moving in. Jacob said it's fine, since it's his apartment now. My head snapped towards Jacob, who was leaning against the wall with an all-too-familiar smug look on his face. What is she talking about, Jacob? Jacob pushed off from the wall and sauntered over with an impudent grin. Exactly what she said. I've had enough, Eliza. You've been riding my back for years, making me your servant. It's time I took what's mine. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Your servant? Are you out of your mind? I've supported you, paid your debts. Linda piped up again, her voice sharp. And that just proves it. You've kept him under your thumb, paying to keep him tied to you. Jacob nodded vigorously as he pulled a stack of papers from behind a cushion on the sofa. I've filed for divorce, and I'll be seeking compensation for years of mistreatment and alimony, since I've been the one stuck at home. The absurdity of his words stung. I looked around at the home I had built, at the faces of his nieces and nephews who looked confused and tired. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a coup. I realized then that any response would be futile. Jacob had made up his mind, egged on by Linda's greedy ambitions. Instead of the explosive reaction they expected, I turned, my movements calm and deliberate, and went to our bedroom to pack a bag. Jacob called after me, his voice laced with false concern. Where do you think you're going, Eliza? I didn't look back as I zipped my suitcase. I'm leaving. My lawyer will be in touch with you. Discuss any further matters with him. As I walked out of the bedroom, suitcase in hand, I could hear Linda's snide whisper. Well, that was easier than I thought. Jacob laughed, a sound that once would have warmed my heart. Now it chilled me to the bone. Yeah, she knows when she's beaten. I could hear their triumphant laughter as I descended in the elevator, but it was hollow. The night air was cool and liberating, and as I hailed a taxi, a small, knowing smile played on my lips. Jacob thought he had won, played his hand perfectly, but he was clueless about the ace I had up my sleeve. I directed the taxi to my house in the elite cottage settlement, an hour's drive away and a world apart from the city's chaos. This house was my sanctuary, unknown to Jacob. Years ago, when my business first flourished, I invested in this property, thinking of my long-term health needs. It nestled within a village that boasted of a specialized clinic for my condition. I had always planned to move here permanently someday, perhaps when I grew older, or if my health declined further. But with Jacob's betrayal, that day had come sooner than expected. As the taxi rolled through the secure gates, the familiar sight of lush gardens and manicured paths brought a sense of peace. The house stood majestic and inviting, a testament to the life I had built independently of any man. Unpacking didn't take long. I had brought only essentials, knowing everything else I needed was already here. Sinking into an armchair, I exhaled deeply, truly relaxed for the first time in months. The peace was short-lived, however. A few days later, my phone buzzed, a call from Jacob, his voice frantic and angry. Eliza, you set me up. What's this nonsense about paying rent? I couldn't help but smile at his outrage. "Calm down, Jacob. Why don't you come over and we can talk about it? I'll text you the address." The next morning, I watched from my front porch as a car pulled up. Jacob and Linda stepped out, their eyes wide as they took in the expanse of my property. The shock on their faces was almost comical. "What is this place? How do you have a house like this?" Jacob blurted out as they approached. I stood, crossing my arms. "Welcome to my home, Jacob. This is where I've planned to retire. You never asked, so I never mentioned it." Linda, ever the instigator, nudged Jacob. "She's been hiding all this from you, and she made you live in that tiny apartment?" Jacob's confusion turned to anger. "You tricked me, Eliza. And now your lawyer tells me I owe rent for an apartment that's been sold? I spent years taking care of that place." "That apartment was a rental controlled through my company, Jacob. You didn't think to ask about the details, did you? And yes, it's been sold. The rent's due next month," I explained nonchalantly. Linda piped up, her voice dripping with greed. "We want this house, Eliza. If we have to leave the apartment, you should give us this house." Jacob nodded, a desperate look on his face. "Yeah, if you don't, we'll sue. We'll take this to court." I burst out laughing, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. "Oh, you will you? This house was bought before I met you, Jacob. It's protected, outside the reach of your claims." Their faces fell, the realization that they had no legal ground to stand on sinking in. As they continued to protest, I made a simple gesture to the security personnel who had discreetly gathered nearby. Within moments, Jacob and Linda were escorted off the property, their shouts fading into the distance. The courtroom was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the heated emotions running high within its walls. Jacob had filed a lawsuit claiming that I had exploited him, reducing him to little more than a slave in our home. The audacity of it made my blood boil, but I maintained my composure, trusting in the stack of evidence my lawyer had organized. Jacob took the stand, his voice shaky but determined. Every day was the same. I cleaned, I cooked, I did everything around that apartment while Eliza just took it all for granted. She treated me like I was less than nothing, he declared, throwing a resentful glance my way. Linda was next, her testimony dripping with exaggeration. My brother was completely under her thumb. She was cruel, always belittling him. I saw it myself. She's a tyrant. My lawyer, calm and precise, called our first witness, Helen, the real person who had been managing our household chores while Jacob purportedly played the downtrodden husband. "Can you tell the court your relationship to the defendant?" my lawyer asked. "I was hired by Mr. Jacob to clean their apartment and cook. He paid me from a separate account, which he funded," Helen explained, her voice clear and unwavering. "And how often did Mrs. Eliza interact with you in these matters?" "Never. She didn't even know I existed until the day she found me in their apartment," Helen replied, casting a sympathetic glance my way. The courtroom buzzed, the judge noting the reactions. Jacob's face had gone white, his sister's mouth agape. My lawyer then presented the prenuptial agreement, the document displayed for all to see. This agreement, signed by both parties, clearly states that in the event of a divorce, Mr. Jacob is entitled to nothing. No alimony, no compensation. Would you confirm, Mr. Jacob, that this is your signature? Jacob, now visibly sweating, nodded weakly. "Yes, but I didn't." "You didn't read it?" My lawyer cut in sharply. "Yet you signed it, correct?" "Yes," Jacob admitted, his voice barely a whisper. The judge made a note, his expression unreadable. As the final blow, I had instructed my lawyer to bring up the payment I made to clear Jacob's gambling debts. The signed receipt was shown, proving his financial irresponsibility and my attempts to save our financial stability. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, it is clear that Mr. Jacob's claims are unfounded. The court denies the claim for compensation and alimony. Furthermore, the prenuptial agreement stands as legally binding. The divorce is granted. Jacob slumped, defeated, while Linda's face contorted with rage. "You idiot," she hissed at him outside the courtroom. "You screwed up everything. We had a perfect setup, and you couldn't even play your part right." As they bickered, I walked away from the courthouse, a weight lifted off my shoulders. Jacob had been planning to live off me, thinking he could outsmart me. His greed was his undoing, and now he was left with nothing but his own failures to contemplate. Life had a funny way of coming full circle, and as I sat in my sunlit living room overlooking the gardens of my secure, serene village home, I couldn't help but reflect on the whirlwind that had been my life over the past few years. My business was thriving, managed efficiently by my assistant, and my health was stable, monitored closely by the excellent clinic just down the road. I was finally at peace, or so I thought, until Jacob showed up again, uninvited and unwelcome, disrupting my tranquility. It was a crisp morning when I saw him at the gates through the security camera, looking disheveled and desperate. I had instructed the guards never to let him in, but somehow he had talked his way up to the front door. As I opened it, he fell to his knees, an act so dramatic it would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. "Eliza, please, you have to take me back," Jacob pleaded, his voice cracking. "I'll do anything. I'll cook, clean, whatever you want. Just let me stay here." I stared down at him, my disgust mounting by the second. "Get up, Jacob. You're making a scene," I said, my voice icy. "It's all Linda's fault. She talked me into everything, the divorce, the claims. I never wanted any of it." His words tumbled out in a rush, a sloppy attempt at excusing his actions. I crossed my arms, feeling the anger bubble inside me. "You expect me to believe that? After everything, you think you can just blame Linda and I'll forgive you?" Jacob's eyes were pleading, but behind them, I could still see the same selfishness. "Eliza, I'm broke. I've had to take out a massive loan to pay you back that $70,000, and now I'm struggling. I can't survive out there." "Should have thought of that before you tried to cheat me out of everything I've worked for," I snapped back. His hardships were of his own making, his current state was not my responsibility. Realizing his groveling was getting him nowhere, Jacob's tone shifted, edged with desperation. "Eliza, I need this. Please." I shook my head, resolute. "You need to leave, Jacob. Now." When he hesitated, I turned and signaled to the security standing by. They promptly stepped forward, each taking an arm, and lifted Jacob off the ground. "No, Eliza, please, Enough, Jacob. You've made your bed. Now lie in it." I interrupted him firmly, my patience worn thin. As the guards escorted him away, I instructed them to ensure he would never be allowed on the premises again. Turning back to my home, I felt a surge of relief mixed with sadness. Sadness for the man I thought I had married, and relief that I was now truly free of him. I had dreams to chase and a life to live that was not defined by the deceit of a failed marriage. My home was my sanctuary, tailored to my needs and filled with peace. I planned to travel, see the world in ways I never had before, and meet people who shared my passions and integrity. As I looked out over the lush greenery that bordered my home, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. The world was wide and full of possibilities, and I was ready to explore it on my own terms, with my head held high and my heart open to new adventures. Jacob was a chapter closed, a lesson learned in trust and resilience. Now, it was time for new stories to begin.
The day I tossed my graduation cap into the air felt like the first page of a new chapter. Michael and I had our whole future laid out in front of us, or so I thought. We were just a couple of college sweethearts with big dreams, about to embark on what everyone hopes will be the happiest part of their life. "Babe, we did it. Can you believe it?" Michael wrapped his arms around me as we stood among our fellow graduates, buzzing with excitement. "I know, right? It's like the last 4 years just flew by," I replied, leaning into his embrace. It was comfortable, familiar. But little did I know, that comfort would soon be tested. We decided to throw a small graduation party at my place. It wasn't much, just a cramped apartment I shared with a roommate, but it was ours for the night. The room was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and too loud music, just the way we liked it. Julie, dear, so what's next for you two lovebirds? Michael's mom, Jane, asked, her voice slicing through the din as she handed me a drink. Jane had always been the outspoken one in their family, never shying away from speaking her mind. Oh, we're just looking forward to settling down, getting jobs, you know, the usual adult stuff, I said, trying to sound more confident about our future than I felt. Jane nodded, eyeing us like a chess player contemplating her next move. Well, you're always welcome to stay with us until you find your feet. Right, Richard? Richard, Michael's dad, was a quieter sort, always tucked behind a newspaper or lost in thought. He looked up, a bit startled. Yes, of course, he muttered, giving me a warm but distant smile. Thanks, but I think we'll manage on our own. We've actually been looking at some places. Michael chimed in, his hand finding mine and giving it a reassuring squeeze. The night went on, the future seemed bright, and for a moment, everything felt just right. A few weeks later, we found a small house for rent. It wasn't much, but it was a start, a place for us to build our lives together. The day we moved in was chaotic, boxes everywhere, neither of us knowing a thing about setting up a home. Hey, where do you want this box? Michael called out from the living room, struggling under the weight of what I assumed was our collection of college textbooks. Just dump it anywhere for now. We can sort it out later. I yelled back from the kitchen, my hands deep in another box marked kitchen stuff. As we unpacked, we talked about everything, our jobs, which we were about to start, our dreams of eventually buying a house, maybe even starting a family down the line. It all seemed so possible, so close we could almost touch it. It's been a whirlwind couple of years. We'd even started talking about getting a mortgage and buying a place to truly call our own. That's when life decided to throw us a curveball. I was pregnant. The day I told Michael, he was over the moon. Seriously? We're going to be parents, he had exclaimed, his face splitting into one of those big, goofy grins that made me fall for him in the first place. Yeah, seriously, I laughed, my heart swelling with a mix of excitement and nerves. You ready to be a dad? More than ready. Let's do this, he replied, pulling me into a hug that felt like it could squeeze all the worry out of me. His parents, Jane and Richard, were just as thrilled when we broke the news. A grandchild, finally. Jane had clapped her hands, beaming. Oh, Michael, he will be just adorable. I just know it. Richard, ever the stoic one, had simply nodded and offered one of his rare smiles. Congratulations, you too. Fast forward to the day our little bundle arrived. Lucas was his name, and he was every bit as perfect as we'd hoped he'd be. Jane was the first to declare, "He's a spitting image of you, Michael, at that age. Oh, I'm going to love him even more than I loved you, if that's possible." Her words were meant as a jest, I knew, but they echoed in my mind more often than I cared to admit. Soon enough, Jane's constant presence in our home began to weigh on me. It started out innocently enough, her coming over to help out, cook us meals, give me a chance to shower or catch a quick nap. But days turned into weeks, and her visits stretched longer and longer. By the time Lucas was 5 months old, I was gearing up to return to work, and the issue of who would watch him loomed large. Hiring a nanny felt daunting, not to mention expensive. So, when Jane offered to step in, it seemed like the perfect solution. But it wasn't long before a new worry crept in. Lucas was getting spoiled rotten. Every day I came home to new toys, new clothes, things we didn't need, things we didn't even have space for. One evening, after finding a brand new, overly expensive baby gadget set up in the living room, I couldn't hold back any longer. Jane, we need to talk. All of this. I gestured around. It's too much. He doesn't need all these things. Jane looked taken aback, her hands pausing in the act of folding some of Lucas's freshly laundered, designer baby clothes. But I just want to give him everything. He's my grandson. I know, and I appreciate that, really, I do. But he needs to learn to appreciate things, too. He can't have everything he wants. I tried to explain, my voice firm yet gentle. Before Jane could reply, Michael stepped in, his tone surprisingly sharp. Mom's right, Julie. What's the harm in pampering him a bit? He's just a baby. I turned to Michael, frustration simmering. It's not about now, Michael. It's about setting precedents. About him growing up thinking he can have anything he wants. The conversation ended there, but the issue didn't. I lay awake that night, wondering if I was being too harsh, or if I was just trying to be the kind of mom I thought I should be. After we moved into our new house, a dream fulfilled by a tight budget and a hefty mortgage, life took on a semblance of normalcy, or so I thought. Our little Lucas was now a bubbly, toddling 1-year-old, filling the house with his laughter and the pitter-patter of tiny feet. Just as we were adjusting to being homeowners and the financial strains it brought, life decided to throw another curveball my way. I was pregnant again. That evening, after dinner, Lucas playing at our feet, I broached the subject. Michael, I have something amazing to tell you. I'm pregnant again. My voice was shaky, teetering between nervousness and excitement. Michael's face, however, didn't mirror my enthusiasm. It fell, his brow furrowing deeply as he processed the news. What? Now? Julie, you know this isn't good timing. We're barely managing as it is with the mortgage and everything. This might not be the best idea. The words he didn't say hung heavily between us. Get rid of it. I felt sick to my stomach, not from the pregnancy, but from his implied suggestion. His parents were even less supportive. When we told them, hoping for some words of encouragement or even excitement, Jane was quick to express her disapproval. Julie, one child is enough to give everything to. Lucas needs all the resources we can provide. Another child might just stretch things too thin, Jane lectured, her tone final, as if she'd just passed down a law. I don't believe that's true, I countered, feeling a surge of protectiveness. Many families have more than one child. We can adjust and manage. It's not about resources, it's about love. Michael interjected, siding with his mother. Mom's right, Julie. Think about what's best for Lucas. Maybe it's not the right time for another baby. But my mind was made up. I'm having this baby, Michael, with or without your support, I declared, a resolve stealing within me that I hadn't known I possessed. The months that followed were tense and cold. Michael's disappointment turned into resentment that neither of us knew how to navigate. When our daughter Mia was born, he wasn't by my side. He didn't even come to the hospital. Returning home with Mia, cradling her in my arms while managing the door keys, was one of the loneliest moments of my life. At home, Jane's attitude was frostier than ever. She barely glanced at Mia, her granddaughter, choosing instead to focus all her attention on Lucas. Let me take Lucas for some time. You'll have your hands full with the baby, she offered, her voice devoid of warmth. After a moment's hesitation, I agreed. It would be easier to adjust at home with Mia without Lucas needing my immediate attention. But handing Lucas over to Jane felt like I was splitting my heart in two. The days turned into weeks, and Michael's visits home became fewer and farther between. He often stayed at his mother's, avoiding the responsibility of dealing with Mia or our strained relationship. When Mia turned 1, Lucas returned from staying with his grandparents. He had been away for what felt like forever, and I thought his coming back would bring some normalcy back to our fractured home. I couldn't have been more wrong. Lucas had changed. The little boy who left was not the boy who came back. He had become demanding, defiant, and, frankly, spoiled rotten. It was clear Jane and Michael had doted on him to the extreme, exacerbating the disparity between how my children were treated. Mia, in stark contrast, had grown quiet and self-contained, accustomed to receiving far less attention than her brother. One afternoon, the tension that had been building up spilled over. I was in the kitchen, preparing snacks for the kids, when I heard a scuffle from the living room, followed by Mia's cry. Rushing in, I saw Lucas standing over Mia, a smug look on his face, while she sobbed on the floor. Lucas, why would you push your sister? That's not okay. I exclaimed, pulling Mia into my arms to comfort her. Lucas's face twisted into a scowl. She took my toy. It's mine. But you have to share, Lucas. Mia didn't mean any harm. I tried to explain, keeping my voice as calm as I could manage, despite the anger bubbling inside. Lucas didn't take it well. "No. I don't want to. I'll tell Grandma you're being mean." Before I could respond, he had stormed out, likely heading to the phone to complain to Jane. True enough, it wasn't long before Michael stormed in, his face dark with anger. "Julie, what's this I hear about you bullying Lucas? Mom says you're always on Mia's side." Michael confronted me, his tone accusatory. "I'm not bullying our son, Michael. I'm trying to teach him to be kind to his sister." He pushed Mia. I shot back, frustration straining my voice as Mia clung to me, still sniffling. "Lucas is just a child, Julie. You can't expect him to understand everything. You're always picking on him. Just let him be," Michael retorted, dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. The conversation ended with Michael walking away, leaving me to soothe Mia and simmer in my own unresolved anger and sadness. As Mia grew, her interests began to diverge sharply from the usual playtime activities. She showed an early fascination with building blocks and anything mechanical. I remember one evening, sitting down with her, watching as she intently stacked blocks with such focus and determination. "Look, Mommy, I made a tower." Mia beamed, her eyes lighting up with pride. "That's amazing, sweetheart. You're so clever." I praised her, my heart swelling with pride. Her intelligence and creativity deserved to be nurtured. I did what I could to support her interests, saving up to buy her a small robotics kit for her birthday since I knew better than to expect any gifts from Michael or his parents. Their blatant neglect of Mia's milestones continued to be a source of heartache for me. As my children grew, the imbalance in how they were treated by their father and his parents became more glaring. When Lucas graduated from high school, his grandparents proudly handed him keys to a new car, making it a grand spectacle. A year later, it was Mia's turn. As valedictorian, she stood on the stage, her speech moving some to tears. But when the ceremony ended, there was no grand gesture for her, not even a small token of recognition from her father. I, however, had managed to scrape together enough to buy her a new laptop for college, essential, not extravagant. Mia chose a technical college renowned for its robotics program. She was driven, and it paid off when she earned a scholarship after her first year. "Mom, I got the scholarship. My project got top marks," she exclaimed over the phone one evening, her voice vibrating with excitement. "That's my girl. I knew you could do it," I replied, my heart swelling with pride. Life went on, with Mia diving deep into her studies while Lucas drifted, relying on the cushion his grandparents provided. The real storm brewed the day Mia announced she wanted to bring her boyfriend, Ethan, home to meet us. I was thrilled. Michael's reaction, however, was anything but warm. Upon hearing the news, Michael scoffed. "Why should I be around to meet some boy she's bringing home? It's not like I'm even sure she's mine." The insinuation was a dagger to my heart. "If you're so unsure, why don't we just do a DNA test? Settle this once and for all," I shot back, the challenge clear in my tone. He waved off the suggestion. "No need to waste money on that. Believe what you want," he said before grabbing his keys and leaving, not just the house but the situation, escaping from facing his responsibilities once again. That evening, as Mia and Ethan arrived, the air was bittersweet. Mia's excitement was tempered by her father's absence, but I put on my bravest face. "I'm so glad to meet you, Ethan. Mia has told us so much about you," I said, welcoming him with a warm embrace. We spent the evening talking about their future plans, their dreams, and before long, Mia dropped another piece of news. "Mom, Ethan and I, we're planning to get married soon." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you both," I managed to say, my emotions a mix of joy for Mia and sorrow for her father's absence. Later that night, after Ethan had left, Mia and I sat down, a mother-daughter moment that felt heavier than usual. "I just don't understand why Dad can't just be happy for me," Mia confessed, her voice a whisper of sadness. "Oh, baby, I know. I'm so sorry he isn't here for you as he should be. But no matter what, remember I'm always here for you. Always," I assured her, holding her close. The day of Mia's wedding arrived, a milestone I had both dreaded and longed for, given everything that had transpired over the years. As the guests filled the small chapel, whispers of excitement mingled with the rustle of silk and satin. But there was a palpable absence, the void where Michael, his parents, and Lucas should have been. Mia, dressed in a simple yet stunning gown, her eyes occasionally darting towards the entrance, masked her disappointment well. "Mom, have you heard from Dad?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper as we stood in the small bridal suite. "I've tried calling him, sweetheart, but his phone goes straight to voicemail," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady despite the anger brewing inside me. Just then, a notification pinged on my phone. It was a live broadcast notification from Michael's social media. Curious and anxious, I clicked it, and there he was, not in a suit ready for his daughter's wedding but in ski gear, laughing with Jane and Richard by his side, snow-capped mountains in the background. In a moment of sheer disbelief, I typed a comment on the live broadcast, my fingers shaking. "Why are you not at your daughter's wedding?" It took him only a moment to see the comment. "We decided this was a better use of our time," he responded callously, the camera panning to show a smiling Lucas. "Family time." I felt Mia peering over my shoulder, her eyes widening in hurt and disbelief as she watched the scene unfold. She turned away, her decision made in an instant. "I don't need him. I'll walk myself down the aisle. From today on, I consider my father dead to me." As the bridal march began, Mia squared her shoulders and walked down the aisle alone. At the altar, Mia turned to the gathered friends and family, her voice strong and clear. "Thank you for being here today. I apologize for my father's absence, he chose differently today." After the ceremony, at the reception, Mia invited the guests to watch a video she had prepared. "I made this for my father, to show him what he missed throughout my life," she announced, her voice cracking slightly with emotion. The video was a compilation of clips, birthdays with no presents from her father, holidays where her brother was the center of attention, numerous moments of being overlooked and ignored by her grandparents. The stark contrast of her childhood next to her brother's was painful and poignant. The room was silent except for the occasional sniffle. As the video ended, the support for Mia was overwhelming. Guests approached her, offering words of comfort and admiration for her strength. Later that evening, Mia took the stage, her eyes scanning the room, landing on me. "I want to thank my mom, the strongest woman I know, for everything. She gave me life, and then she gave me everything she could to make it a good one, despite everything else." As the guests stood clapping, I felt a mix of pride and a deep, searing pain for all that Mia had endured. But seeing her there, resilient, successful, and loved, I knew that despite the failures of others, we had triumphed. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, I started packing. Michael and Lucas were still at the ski resort, their absence now a blessing in disguise. I moved quickly, sorting through years of accumulated life, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. By noon, I had rented a small apartment close to my work and had my essentials packed and ready. I called a lawyer recommended by a friend and set up a consultation. "Make sure everything is in order for the property division, and I'll need to discuss potential alimony," I instructed over the phone, my voice steadier than I felt. I left the divorce papers on the living room table, a silent message to Michael that I was done. When he returned, the shock must have hit him hard. The first call I received was filled with confusion and anger. "Julie? Why is there no dinner? Where are you?" His voice was demanding, expecting the routine that had governed our lives for so long. "I'm not coming back, Michael. I've filed for divorce. You'll find the papers on the table," I replied, my voice calm, devoid of the emotion that once would have made me tremble. "What? Are you a moron? You can't do this, Julie. You need to come back and discuss this," he blustered, his voice a mix of incredulity and fury. "There's nothing to discuss. I'm done, Michael. I hope you find what you're looking for," I said before hanging up, cutting off any further argument. The divorce proceedings were tough. Michael fought against the terms, but the law was on my side. I received half the value of our house and sufficient alimony to compensate for the salary disparity between us. It wasn't just a financial win, it was my freedom, hard-earned and overdue. Meanwhile, Mia's achievements added a brighter note to my transition. She had joined a prestigious scientific laboratory soon after her graduation, where her talent and hard work had quickly been recognized. She called me one evening, her voice bubbling over with excitement. "Mom, I got it. The award I applied for, $1 million for my work on bionic prostheses. We're going to revolutionize the way we help amputees," Mia explained, her enthusiasm infectious. "That's amazing, Mia. I'm so proud of you," I responded, my heart swelling with pride. With the award money, Mia and her husband bought a beautiful house, a place they could call their own and start anew, just as I was doing in my small apartment. The afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lush backyard of Mia's new house as we sat on her deck, sipping lemonade and discussing her latest projects. It was a peaceful scene, a stark contrast to the tumult of our past. I cherished these moments, seeing my daughter thrive in her own space, a testament to her resilience and hard work. My phone buzzed, slicing through the calm. The caller ID showed Michael's number, a name that now seemed to belong to a distant, unpleasant past. I hesitated, then answered, my curiosity piqued. "Julie, I need to talk to you." Michael's voice was strained, desperate. "What is it, Michael?" I asked, my tone guarded. "It's about Lucas. He's gotten himself into a mess, big debts. We've had to sell the house to cover some of it, but it's not enough. I was hoping." "You were hoping what, Michael?" I cut him off, not wanting to drag out his plea. "Well, Mia's got that big award, right? I was thinking maybe she could help her brother out," he stammered, the request hanging between us like a bad smell. I felt a rush of indignation. "You're asking Mia for money? After all this time, that's why you call?" Before I could continue, Mia, who had been listening, took the phone from my hand. "Dad, you're dead to me. Don't call us again. I won't help you or Lucas," she said, her voice icy cold. She hung up the phone and handed it back to me, her hand shaking slightly. I reached out and pulled her into a hug, whispering, "I'm right here, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." Mia leaned into the embrace, her body tense with the effort of confronting her father. "Thanks, Mom. I can't believe he'd only call for that." The weeks that followed brought a cold silence from Michael's end. Word through the grapevine was that he, along with his parents and Lucas, had moved into a small rented apartment, their finances drained by Lucas's irresponsible behaviors. They were caught in a cycle of debt, their salaries and pensions barely covering the interest payments. As for Lucas, my heart ached for him, despite everything. Our estrangement wasn't what I had wanted, but his choices, influenced by his father and grandparents, had led us down this path. I sometimes wondered if things could have been different, if there was something I could have done to change the course of our relationship. One quiet evening, as Mia and I sat watching an old movie, she turned to me, her eyes thoughtful. "Mom, do you ever regret how things turned out with Lucas?" I paused, considering her question. "I regret that he's in trouble and that he's cut off from us. But we made our choices with the best intentions, Mia. Sometimes, that's all we can do." Our lives had diverged sharply from where I once thought we'd be. Michael and I were worlds apart, not just in distance, but in every way that mattered. Lucas, caught in his own spiral, seemed a universe away. But here with Mia, in her success and stability, in the warmth of the life she'd built, I found a bittersweet peace. Growing up, it was just me and Mom. Dad bailed when I was just a tyke, a faded memory more than anything else. Mom worked her fingers to the bone, juggling jobs left and right to keep us afloat and to make sure I could hit the books hard. Because of her sacrifices, I snagged a grant that got me through college without the mountain of debt that was common these days. I studied business management, driven by a cocktail of ambition and fear of ever being as broke as we were when I was a kid. After graduating, I packed up my life and moved to the city. It was a tough start, living in a cramped apartment and surviving on ramen more nights than I'd like to admit. But I landed a job at a large company, started as a junior, and clawed my way up. Fast forward a few years, and I was not just working there, I was running a whole department. It was more than a job, it was my turf, and I made sure everyone who worked with me knew they were valued. You gotta lead with respect, I'd say during the trainings for the newbies. Treat this job like you own it, and soon enough, you won't just be part of the team, you'll be leading it. The team was solid, a bunch of good folks. When I got the nod for the department head spot, we hit the local bar to celebrate. It was nothing fancy, just a cozy place where the beer was cold and the laughs were plenty. Here's to Erica, the boss lady. Marco, one of my oldest colleagues, raised his glass high. The others joined in, the clinks of glasses echoing over the buzz of the bar. Thanks, guys. We're all in this together. Here's to kicking more ass and taking names. I shouted over the noise, and the team roared back in approval. That night, amid the backslaps and cheers, I noticed him, Jake. He caught me looking and sauntered over with a grin that could knock you off balance. Couldn't help but notice the celebration. What's the occasion? He asked, leaning against the bar. Just a little career boost. I'm the new head of my department now, I said, trying not to sound too braggy. That's impressive. Must be a tough gig, he replied, nodding appreciatively. I'm Jake, by the way. Erica. Nice to meet you, Jake. We got to talking more seriously than I intended that night. Turns out, Jake was a financier, knew his way around numbers like I did around project plans. Over the next 6 months, what started as casual dates turned into weekends spent together, and not long after, I was spending more time at his place than my own. He had a killer apartment, high ceilings, a view that made you want to brag about it, and a warmth that my dingy rental couldn't match. One evening, as we were overlooking the city lights from his balcony, Jake turned to me, a serious look washing over his usually playful face. He took my hands in his, and I could feel the nervous energy vibrating through them. Erica, these past months with you have been the best of my life. I know this might seem fast, but when you know, you just know, right? He started, his voice a mix of certainty and hope. I nodded, the cityscape blurring a bit as my heart started to race. He pulled out a small box from his jacket and opened it to reveal a ring that caught the light just right, sparkling almost as much as his eyes. Will you marry me, Erica? Yes, Jake. Absolutely, yes. I managed, my voice thick with emotion. And just like that, I was engaged. Engaged to a man who saw me, really saw me, and loved all the parts of me, even the ones that were tough as nails. The day I was supposed to meet Jake's parents, my stomach was in knots. As Jake drove us up to a sprawling mansion with a driveway longer than my entire apartment block, it hit me, these folks were not just well off, they were loaded. Stepping out of the car, I could feel the weight of the place. The house looked like something out of an old British movie, all brick and ivy, with gargoyles staring down like they knew I didn't belong. Jake squeezed my hand as we walked up to the huge oak doors. You'll be fine, Erica, he whispered, but his voice sounded like he was trying to convince himself too. The doors swung open, and there stood Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove. His suit probably cost more than my rent, and her dress was something you'd see in a magazine. The foyer was massive, with a chandelier overhead that sparkled like a constellation. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking folks with titles like Sir and Lady. Erica, lovely to finally meet you. I'm Charles, and this is my wife, Eleanor, Mr. Hargrove said, his voice smooth but cool, with a hint of an English accent that sounded practiced. Mrs. Hargrove gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Pleased to meet you both, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. As we moved into the dining room, Jake whispered quick tips about which fork to use for what, but his words were a jumble in my head. Dinner was served, and it felt like sitting in a freezer, the air so cold with judgment. Mr. Hargrove pointed to a portrait of a stern-looking man with a thick beard. That's Sir Reginald Hargrove, a direct ancestor from England. Came over in the 1800s to establish our family here, he said proudly. Really impressive, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic, but it was hard to eat when you felt like every move was being critiqued. I reached for what I thought was the salad fork, but the silence that followed told me I'd messed up. I glanced at Jake for help, but before he could whisper anything, Mrs. Hargrove's voice cut through. "Perhaps things are done differently where you come from, dear," she said, each word sharp and precise. "Sorry, still getting the hang of all this," I mumbled, my cheeks burning hot. Jake tried to smooth things over, jumping into a story about us, but his parents were more interested in watching my struggle with the dessert spoon next. I felt smaller with each course, their stares heavy on my shoulders. After the icy dinner, we all shuffled into the Hargroves' expansive living room. The plush carpets and heavy curtains made the room feel even more suffocating than the dining hall. I sunk into one of the ornate chairs, feeling like I was an exhibit in a museum about commoners. Mrs. Hargrove, perched elegantly on the edge of her seat, leaned forward. "Erica, dear, tell us more about your family. Your upbringing must have been quite different from ours." I hesitated, feeling Jake's tense gaze on me. "Well, it was mostly just me and my mom. My dad left when I was really young, and I don't remember him much. Mom did everything to raise me on her own. She's a nurse." The room fell deathly silent. Mrs. Hargrove stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the wood floor like a scream. "This is unacceptable," she declared, her voice resonating with disgust. "We are descendants of an ancient English lineage. We have standards, traditions. I cannot, will not, allow my only son to marry someone without pedigree or knowledge of her own lineage." Mr. Hargrove, who had been silently observing the conversation, finally spoke. His words were calculated, each one dropping like a weight. "It's essential for us that our family ties are strong and well documented. Erica, can you even name your great-grandparents?" I felt my face heat up, the embarrassment gnawing at me. "I only know about my maternal grandparents," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hargrove rolled his eyes, a clear sign of contempt. "This is exactly what we feared," he muttered under his breath. Jake finally intervened, his tone firm yet pleading. "Mom, Dad, please. Erica is kind, hardworking, and she loves me. Isn't that what should matter?" His mother's gaze was steely. "Respect and adherence to our family standards are what matter, Jacob. If Erica is to join this family, she must learn our ways. She needs to respect where she is coming from, even if it is nowhere significant." Their words stung, slicing through the warm feelings from earlier in the evening. But Jake was looking at me, his eyes begging me to just go along with it. I nodded, reluctantly agreeing to their terms. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll learn about your family and your traditions." Mrs. Hargrove seemed somewhat placated by my concession. "Good. You'll start by familiarizing yourself with our family tree and understanding who each person in those portraits is. It's not just about names, Erica. It's about respect for our lineage." As they continued talking about their expectations, I felt a part of me shrivel up. The evening had turned from a simple meet and greet into a trial by fire. I had agreed to their demands, yes, but at what cost? As the room filled with discussions of ancestors and noble deeds, I couldn't help but feel alienated from these people and, oddly enough, from the parts of Jake that were tied so tightly to them. The weeks following that stiff dinner were a whirlwind. I barely had time to catch my breath between working my day job and attending the slew of etiquette and style courses that Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove insisted I take. My day started with the buzz of an alarm before sunrise and ended long after the sun had set, leaving me feeling like a zombie. "Elbows off the table, Erica," the etiquette instructor chided gently during one of our sessions. "And remember, the soup spoon moves away from you when you scoop." I nodded, attempting to mirror her movements, but my mind was on a million other things, like the mountain of work waiting for me back at the office and the never-ending wedding plans. "You're doing well," she reassured, her voice soothing. "These things take time to become second nature." I gave her a weak smile. "Thanks, it's a lot, you know?" As if on cue, my phone rang. It was Mom. I excused myself and stepped outside to take the call, pressing the phone against my ear while trying to find a quiet corner in the bustling city. "Hi, Mom," I greeted, my voice more tired than I intended. "Erica, darling, how are the wedding preparations going?" she asked, her voice filled with excitement and a hint of concern. I hesitated, not wanting to worry her. "It's all good. Learning a lot, even picked up how to waltz," I said, trying to keep my tone light. There was a pause, and I knew she wasn't entirely convinced. "You sound exhausted, honey. Are you getting enough rest? You know, all this shouldn't be so hard. You need to take care of yourself." I chuckled weakly. "I'll try, Mom. But there's a lot to juggle right now. Etiquette classes, dance lessons, work, and the wedding planning. Just remember what's important, Erica. It's you and Jake at the end of the day, not all these rules and lessons." Her words were a balm, but as soon as we hung up, the weight of reality settled back on my shoulders. I was caught in a tug-of-war between pleasing Jake's parents and maintaining my sanity. Every day felt like a marathon with no finish line in sight. Back inside, I resumed my training, the instructor's voice a droning background noise as I practiced the proper way to hold a wine glass, pinch the stem, not the bowl, apparently. In the rare moments of downtime, I'd find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if all this was worth it. The constant scrutiny, the endless classes, the cold looks from Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove whenever I slipped up, which was more often than I liked to admit. One evening, as I was about to drift off to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was Jake, his text lighting up the screen. "How was your day? Miss you." I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to tell him everything, to pour out my frustrations and fears, but I held back. Instead, I typed a simple, "Miss you too. Long day, but all good." As I set the phone down, the silence of my apartment felt overwhelming. Was this how it was going to be? Pushing through the exhaustion, smiling through the stress, all for the sake of fitting into a world that seemed increasingly alien to me? The big day had finally arrived. The venue was a flurry of flowers, fancy dresses, and the faces of the city's high society milling about. My stomach was in knots. As I stood in my long, flowing white dress, trying to catch a breath, my mom came over, adjusting a stray curl on my forehead. "Everything will be just fine, Erica," she reassured me with a soft smile. I wanted to believe her, but the minute the ceremony began, any hope of a peaceful wedding evaporated. Jake's parents were on a warpath of superiority. Mr. Hargrove greeted guests with an air of boastfulness, and Mrs. Hargrove was quick to point out to anyone within earshot how they had made everything possible. As the guests settled, I tried to mingle, but Mrs. Hargrove pulled me aside with a frosty smile. "Erica, dear, make sure our friends are taken care of. Fetch some drinks, there's a good girl," she instructed, gesturing imperiously towards a group of elderly gentlemen discussing politics loudly. "But," I started, only to be cut off by her sharp glance. "No buts. You're practically family now, show some initiative," she snapped. Reluctantly, I carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres between tables, my dress trailing behind me. The weight of the fabric and the task made me feel more like a servant than a bride. I caught glimpses of Jake laughing and chatting, oblivious to my plight. As I passed another round of drinks, I overheard Mrs. Hargrove's voice rise above the chatter. "Erica will be serving us tonight. It's good practice for her, don't you think?" Her tone was condescending, her eyes scanning the crowd for approval. That was the last straw. I approached her, my hands shaking slightly but my voice firm. "I am not a waitress at my own wedding. There are staff here who are supposed to do this." Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her expression one of mock surprise. "You should be grateful we allowed such a simple girl into our family. Remember your place, Erica," she hissed, her words like daggers. I felt a flush of anger rise to my cheeks. "This is my wedding, not a performance for your friends," I retorted, my voice louder than intended. The room fell silent. All eyes were on us now. Jake, catching the tail end of our exchange, stumbled over, a glass of champagne in hand. "What's going on here?" He slurred slightly, his eyes not fully focusing. "Your mother is treating me like a servant at our wedding, Jake. This isn't what today is supposed to be about," I said, frustration boiling over. Jake looked between me and his mother, his expression clouding. "Erica, why are you making a scene? Just do what my mom asks." "It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal? Jake, this is our day, and your mom is ruining it," I shot back, disbelief and hurt swirling together. He took a long sip of his champagne before speaking. "Look, Erica, you should be happy I even chose you. There were plenty of girls better than you, prettier, richer. You're making a fuss over nothing." The word stung like a physical slap. I recoiled, the realization hitting me hard. The man I loved, the man I was about to marry, didn't see us as partners. To him, I was just another accessory, something to be molded and fit into the perfect image his parents wanted. As I clutched my bouquet tighter, feeling like I might crumble right there, my mom came over. She took one look at me and wrapped me in her arms, the kind of hug that seemed to hold the world at bay. "Honey, do you love this man? Do you really want to marry him?" she whispered, her voice filled with worry. I shook my head, barely able to muster the voice to speak. "No, Mom, I can't do this. I don't want to." Mom nodded, her jaw setting in that determined way that I knew all too well. She gently took the bouquet from my hands and guided me to a chair, her touch reassuring. Then, with a surprising sprightliness, she approached the DJ, asked for the microphone, and turned to face the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please?" Her voice, clear and steady, cut through the murmurs, drawing every eye in the room to her. There was a hush, the kind that precedes a storm. She took a deep breath and turned to face Mr. and Mrs. Hargrove directly. "I have something important to share, about truth and pretense," she began, her gaze unwavering. "I went to the same school as Charles and Eleanor Hargrove. Back then, they didn't carry an English accent or boast of noble blood. Their families were hard-working folks just like ours." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Charles's father was a mechanic, and Eleanor's mother served tables at the local diner. She paused, letting the words sink in. The portraits, the accents, the surname, they bought them. All to craft a past that would hide where they really came from. The room erupted into whispers, guests turning to stare at the Hargroves, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Mrs. Hargrove stood up, her face red, the facade of aristocracy melting away. "That's preposterous. But my mom wasn't finished. To think that you would stand on these fabrications and look down upon my daughter, judge her worthiness based on a lie. Erica is worth 1,000 of your false titles. She is real, something you've long forgotten how to be." The guests were now openly murmuring, their looks of fascination turning to disdain as they gazed at the Hargroves. Mr. Hargrove tried to speak, his accent slipping into something less refined, more desperate. "We did what we thought was best." "For whom?" My mom cut him off, her voice fierce. "For your son? For society? Or just for your own shallow pride?" The confrontation had drawn everyone's attention, and now the room was buzzing, the atmosphere charged with tension and revelations. The Hargroves seemed to shrink, their grandeur dissolving into the air, leaving nothing but the stark, plain truth of their origins. Jake's face twisted with a mix of shock and anger. He stormed up to me, his voice barely a hiss as he leaned close. "You've ruined everything, Erica. You've disgraced my family, and now you're questioning if I want to marry you? After this spectacle?" His words stung, but before I could respond, he grabbed my arm, pulling me slightly closer. "I'll teach you how to be a good wife, one who knows her place and obeys." His threat hung in the air, heavy and chilling. I pulled my arm back with all my might, stepping away from him. The room was dead silent now, everyone's eyes on us. This was the man I had intended to marry? This was the family I was about to join? No, this couldn't be my life. I took a deep breath, my mother's earlier strength flowing through me. "There will be no wedding," I announced loudly, making sure every guest heard. I regret that I ever considered marrying such a moron, someone who truly matches the arrogance and deceit of his parents. Murmurs filled the room, some of shock, others of support. Jake stood there, mouth agape, as if trying to catch the words and stuff them back into my mouth. My mother came to my side, her presence a comforting shield against the chaos. Together, we walked through the crowd, our heads held high. In the weeks that followed, news of the Hargroves' disgrace spread through the city. Their fabricated lineage and high society standing crumbled like a house of cards in a breeze. People who once revered them now crossed the street to avoid their shame. They sold their mansion and moved away, seeking a fresh start where their past wouldn't haunt them. As for Jake, I heard bits and pieces, rumors of a downward spiral, of nights spent at bars trying to drink away the scandal. I didn't know if they were true, and frankly, I didn't care to know. He had shown his true colors, and they were too dark and twisted for me ever to want to look back. "Thank you, Mom," I said to her one evening as we sat in our modest living room, a stark contrast to the opulent falsity I had almost married into. "For everything. For being there, for standing up for me, for helping me see the truth before it was too late." She took my hand, squeezing it gently. "I'll always be here, Erica. You're my daughter, and I raised you to be strong and true. No man, no family, can ever make you less than what you are." We sat there, the TV chattering in the background, a normalcy that felt refreshing. I had lost a fiancé, but gained back my life, my self-respect, and, more importantly, my future. After the whole wedding debacle, going back to work felt like walking into a sanctuary. My colleagues, who had heard about the chaos, were nothing short of supportive. "Erica, you dodged a bullet, girl," Marco said as soon as I walked into the office. He was leaning against my desk, a steaming cup of coffee in his hand, which he handed to me as a peace offering, or maybe a welcome-back gift. "Thanks, Marco. Feels good to be back," I replied, taking the coffee and savoring the familiar bitter warmth. "And yeah, that bullet was more like a cannonball." Jenny chimed in from her cubicle across the way. "Anyone who makes you serve guests at your own wedding is no husband material. You deserve way better, hun." I smiled, grateful for the camaraderie. "I think so too. It's nice to be back where I'm appreciated for what I do, not for the family I might have married into." As the days turned into weeks, the support from my team didn't waver. It was during this healing time that I met Brian. He was a friend of a friend, nothing fancy about his background, just a genuine guy with a quick smile and an easygoing attitude that was infectious. We met at a small get-together. It was low-key, just a few friends hanging out on a Saturday afternoon. He was there, laughing at something silly when I walked in. "Hey, you must be Erica," he said, standing up to greet me. "I've heard a lot about you." "All good things, I promise." "Thanks, Brian. I hope they didn't embellish too much," I replied, trying to match his easy demeanor. We hit it off instantly. His family was the polar opposite of the Hargroves. The first time I met his parents, they welcomed me with warm hugs and genuine smiles. "Erica, we're just glad Brian found someone who makes him so happy," his mom said, pulling me into a hug as soon as I stepped through their front door. It was refreshing, the simplicity of it all. No pretenses, no demands. Just mutual respect and acceptance. Brian and I weren't rushing anything. We were taking our time, getting to know each other beyond the surface level. Back at work, my boss called me into his office one day. "Erica, I just want to say, we've all noticed how you've handled everything. It's not been easy, but you've managed to keep your performance top-notch." I nodded, unsure where this was leading. "We think it's time for another promotion. You've proven you can handle just about anything, and your leadership has never wavered." Leaving his office, I felt a surge of pride. With a new relationship developing, a career on the rise, and the respect of those I cared about, I was finally in a place where I felt I belonged. I'm Lily, a florist with a small shop downtown. It's not much, but it's mine. Flowers have always been my thing, they don't talk back, and they're a hell of a lot simpler than people. It was just another gray afternoon when he walked into my life. The door chimed and in came this guy, looking like he'd just come from a corporate battlefield, tie askew, and hair slightly damp from rain. He paused by the entrance, scanning the colorful chaos of my shop, before his eyes settled on me. "Hey, I need a bouquet, something that says, 'I'm sorry I forgot Mother's Day again this year,'" he said with a half-embarrassed, half-amused grin. "Right," I chuckled, sizing him up. "You look like you could use all the help you can get." He laughed, a genuine sound that made me smile as I picked out some lilies and roses. "I'm Jack, by the way." "Lily," I replied, hands busy with the stems. As I arranged the bouquet, we chatted about everything and nothing. He worked in finance, lived a couple of blocks away, and yes, he was notoriously bad at remembering important dates. "Here," I said, handing him the finished bouquet, full of whites and pinks. "This should earn you some forgiveness." He smiled, that slow, charming smile that had probably won over tougher crowds than me. "Can I take you out for a coffee then? As a thank you." We exchanged phones to punch in our details, his fingers brushing against mine as he handed it back. Something fluttered in my chest, a little like the excitement I felt when a new shipment of exotic flowers came in. A few days later, we met at a cozy little cafe halfway between his office and my shop. It was a quiet place, the kind with mismatched furniture and a chalkboard menu. We found a spot by the window, rain streaking down the glass outside, a perfect backdrop to a slow, easy conversation. We talked about everything, movies we liked, books we'd read, places we wanted to travel. It was surprising how easy it was to talk to him, how much we had in common, despite our different paths. "So, how about a real date?" Jack asked as we stepped outside, a hopeful note in his voice. "Dinner, maybe?" I smiled, feeling that flutter again, stronger this time. "I'd like that. Yes." As I walked back to my shop, my heart felt lighter than it had in ages. I was happy, truly happy, and I had a feeling things were only going to get better from here. A year flies by when you're in love. Jack and I tied the knot in a quiet ceremony, surrounded by our closest friends and family. His parents, Sarah and George, were beaming the whole time, except for Jack's sister, Susan. She managed a smile, but her eyes didn't quite match the gesture. Jack and I settled into married life easily. We visited his folks often, as they lived just a few blocks over. I loved those visits. His mom and I would spend hours chatting over tea, or we'd go shopping. George was battling cancer, and as his health worsened, I tried to be there more, helping out any way I could. As George's condition worsened, I found myself driving over to their place more often, helping Sarah with the house and spending time with George when he felt up to it. One afternoon, while Sarah and I were returning from a walk, Susan pulled up in her flashy car, a scowl already forming as she saw me. "Here again, Lily? Planning to move in or just making sure you're in the will?" she snapped as soon as she stepped out. "Susan, that's enough," Sarah chided gently, but Susan brushed her off. "No, Mom, it's not enough. She's here all the time, cozying up to you, playing the good daughter-in-law. What's the end game, Lily? Trying to make sure we don't forget about you when the time comes?" I felt my face heat up with anger, but I kept my voice even. "Susan, I'm here because your family is now my family too. I care about your mom and your dad, just like Jack does. This isn't about money, or whatever else you're imagining." She just snorted, shaking her head as she walked past us into the house. Sarah gave me an apologetic look. "Don't mind her, dear. She's always been a bit direct. We know why you're here, and we appreciate it. Don't let her get to you." We tried to carry on like normal, but Susan's visits became more frequent, her comments sharper. She'd critique everything from how I helped in the kitchen to how I decorated our home. It was like walking on eggshells whenever she was around. When George passed away, it was a tough time for all of us. I was heartbroken, not just for myself, but for Jack and Sarah, and even for Susan, though she seemed to handle it all with a stiff upper lip. I threw myself into supporting Sarah, accompanying her on her errands, and just being there whenever she needed to talk. One day, after helping Sarah sort through some of George's things, Susan cornered me in the living room. "You're always here, Lily. Don't you have your own home to go to?" "Susan, stop. I'm here for your mom, not for any other reason. Can't you see she's hurting? Or are you too busy looking for problems where there aren't any?" I was tired of her accusations, tired of defending myself. Walking out of that room, I felt a mix of frustration and sadness. It wasn't easy, dealing with her constant hostility. But I loved Jack, and I loved his parents. No amount of snide remarks would change that. It was a brisk evening when we all gathered at Sarah's house for what I thought was just another family dinner. After we had settled in with our plates heaping with food, Sarah cleared her throat, signaling she had something important to say. "I'd like to read George's will." He wanted us all to hear it together. The room went quiet, all eyes on Sarah as she unfolded the papers with a shaky hand. Jack reached over to give her a reassuring squeeze on her shoulder. Susan and her husband, Rick, leaned in, anticipation written all over their faces. "George left half of his estate to me," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the palpable tension, "and the other half he has left to his future grandchildren." A moment of silence followed. I glanced at Jack, whose face was a mixture of sadness and resolve. He nodded slightly at me, as if to say we'd figure this out together. "Wow, that's a pretty forward-thinking move," I commented, trying to keep the mood light. "Ensuring the kids have something is really thoughtful." Susan, on the other hand, didn't take it so lightly. "So, basically, Rick and I need to hurry up and have kids," she blurted out, half joking, half serious. "It's not a race, Susan," Jack said, trying to soothe the sudden tension. But for Susan, it seemed to become exactly that, a race. Over the next few months, her efforts to conceive became her main focus. She talked incessantly about doctor's appointments and fertility treatments at every family gathering. It was clear this quest was taking a toll on her. One Sunday lunch, as we all dug into dessert, Susan launched into a detailed account of their latest visit to the fertility clinic. "You wouldn't believe how much we've spent already," she complained, spooning another large piece of cake onto her plate. "It's like a full-time job, this whole getting pregnant thing." As the months rolled on, Susan's frustration only grew. Despite her efforts, pregnancy remained elusive. At a particularly low point, after her third unsuccessful attempt at artificial insemination, she broke down during a family barbecue. "It's not fair," she cried out, tears streaming down her face as she sat slumped in a patio chair. "Why is this happening to me? I'm trying everything, and nothing works." "It's going to be okay, Susan." Sarah tried to console her, rubbing her back. "These things take time. Maybe you're putting too much pressure on yourself." But Susan was beyond consolation. "You don't understand, Mom. It's not just about having a baby. It's about Dad's will, about securing our future. I need this." The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking. Jack and I exchanged looks, both of us feeling helpless. We knew how much she wanted this, how it had consumed her. It was another one of those communal dinners at Sarah's house. These gatherings had become more strained than soothing, especially with Susan's increasing demands and deteriorating demeanor. As we all sat down, the air was thick with the scent of roast beef and the undercurrents of unspoken tensions. Just as we were about to start eating, Susan clinked her glass, standing with a bit of a struggle due to her now prominent belly. "I have an announcement," she declared, her voice tinged with a mix of triumph and challenge. "I'm pregnant, finally," she beamed, rubbing her belly. The table erupted in congratulations, everyone expressing their joy and relief, but I noticed the smug look she shot me as she continued. "And once the baby arrives, Dad's money will go to where it rightfully belongs, my child." Her words, especially the way she looked at me when she said them, felt like a slap. Jack squeezed my hand under the table, a silent signal not to rise to the bait. "That's wonderful news, Susan," I managed to say, keeping my voice steady despite the irritation bubbling inside. Yeah, isn't it? Susan smirked. It's just so perfect. Now everything's falling into place. As the dinner progressed, Susan's demeanor became more unbearable. She demanded special attention for her dietary needs and wouldn't let anyone forget for a minute that she was carrying the family's future heir. Could you pass the salt? Oh wait, no, I shouldn't. Doctor's orders, she'd say, then launch into a detailed account of her latest doctor's visit, fishing for more sympathy. Jack and Sarah were endlessly patient with her, but I could see the strain on their faces. Later, when I helped Sarah clear the dishes while the others sat digesting both the meal and Susan's news, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Lily. I know she can be a bit much." Her attitude only worsened over the months. Her pregnancy seemed to embolden her, giving her new ammunition to use against me. She critiqued everything from the way I dressed. "Don't you think that skirt's a bit tight for a family dinner, Lily?" To how much time I spent at work, "Must be nice, caring more about flowers than family." Each visit left me more drained than the last. I started making excuses to avoid these family gatherings, much to Jack's dismay. "I know she's tough, but she's still my sister. We need to show some unity, especially now," he'd argue. But it was hard. Hard to sit there and be the target of Susan's sharp tongue, hard to watch her turn what should have been a happy time into a series of battles, each one chipping away at the family's foundations. One quiet afternoon, when I thought I had the house to myself, I overheard Susan talking to Rick in the kitchen. "Once this baby is born, things are going to change around here. I'll make sure of it." Her words chilled me. It wasn't just about the inheritance anymore, it was about control, about reshaping the family dynamics to her whims. Life has a funny way of throwing you curveballs when you least expect it. One such curveball came my way on an ordinary Thursday morning. I hadn't been feeling right for a few days, nausea washing over me in waves, a weird aversion to coffee, and on a hunch, I bought a pregnancy test. When the 2 pink lines appeared, my heart did a little dance. I was pregnant. Barely containing my excitement, I waited for Jack to come home from work. The moment he walked through the door, I blurted out, "Guess what? We're going to have a baby." Jack's eyes widened, his briefcase hitting the floor with a thud as he rushed over to hug me. "Seriously? Oh my God, that's amazing, Lily." We spent the evening in our little bubble of happiness, but soon it was time to confirm things professionally. After a visit to the doctor and the positive results in hand, we decided it was time to share the news with Sarah. We planned a visit the following weekend, hoping for a joyful family gathering. As we pulled up to Sarah's house, butterflies fluttered in my stomach. The news of our growing family felt like a beacon of joy amidst the usual tension with Susan. When we walked in, we were surprised to find Susan there too, her belly now quite prominent. "Mom, we have some great news," Jack started, beaming as he took my hand. Sarah's face lit up with anticipation. "What is it, dear?" I smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment. "I'm pregnant, Sarah. You're going to have another grandchild." Sarah clasped her hands together, tears brimming in her eyes. "Oh, my dears, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you both." But as we turned to Susan, the atmosphere shifted. Her face drained of color, her lips tightening into a thin line. "This is convenient, isn't it?" Susan's voice was sharp, her eyes flickering with anger. "And how do we even know it's true? For all we know, she could be making it up to get a piece of the inheritance. We should have a DNA test. Who knows if it's even Jack's?" Jack stepped between us, his body tense. "Don't you dare accuse Lily of such things. She's your sister-in-law, and she deserves your respect, not your conspiracy theories." Susan scoffed. "Respect? She's nothing but a gold digger. Watch, she'll probably give birth to some freak." That was the last straw. Tears spilled down my cheeks, the hurt too deep to contain. Jack wrapped his arm around me, his own face a mask of anger and disbelief. "Apologize to her, now," he demanded, but Susan just rolled her eyes. "I'm not feeling well. I need to go home," she muttered, avoiding our gazes as she grabbed her purse and stormed out. Sarah hurried over to us, her expression apologetic. "I'm so sorry, my dears. Please don't mind her. She's been under a lot of stress, and the hormones, they're making her a bit more." "It's not just the hormones, Mom," Jack said quietly. "It's her. And it's getting out of hand." Sarah nodded sadly, her eyes filled with worry. "I know, Jack. I'll talk to her. But for now, let's focus on this beautiful news. Lily, my dear, I'm so thrilled for you both." As we sat down to a quieter dinner, the earlier excitement dampened by Susan's outburst, I tried to focus on the positive. I was going to be a mother, and no amount of spite from Susan could take away the joy of that realization. When Jack's mother invited me over for morning coffee and mentioned she had baked my favorite blueberry pie, I couldn't resist. I arrived at Sarah's home, to the comforting aroma of fresh coffee and pie. To my surprise, Susan was there too. The atmosphere was oddly calm, a stark contrast to our last encounter. She even managed a small smile as I walked in. "Lily, I want to apologize for last time," Susan said, her voice lower than usual. "I was out of line. It shouldn't have happened." I was taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor, but decided to take the high road. "Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Let's just put it behind us." We sat down at the kitchen table, and Sarah served the pie and poured the coffee. The pie was as delicious as I remembered, and for a moment, it felt like things might actually be okay. But halfway through, a sharp headache pierced through my temples. "Ugh, I've got a terrible headache all of a sudden," I murmured, rubbing my forehead. "Oh, I have something for that," Susan quickly said, getting up from her seat. "It's totally safe for pregnancy. I'll get it for you." She returned with a pill and a glass of water, her hand steady, her eyes watching me closely. "Here, this will help." I hesitated for a moment, looking at the small white pill in her hand. Something felt off, but my throbbing head pushed those thoughts away. I thanked her and swallowed the pill, hoping for relief. After a few minutes, my headache didn't subside. Instead, a wave of nausea overcame me. "I think I need to rinse my glass," I said, standing unsteadily. In the kitchen, as I washed the glass, my gaze caught on something in the trash bag. My heart stopped when I saw the packaging. It was unmistakably the type of medicine George used during his chemotherapy. Panic surged through me as I remembered the dire warnings about such drugs and their effects on pregnancy. My hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. "I think I've taken something dangerous for my pregnancy," I said as soon as the operator picked up. "Ma'am, you need to try to vomit immediately to prevent any more absorption into your system," the operator instructed urgently. I dropped the phone and turned to the sink, drinking cups of water rapidly before forcing myself to throw up. It was horrible, the feeling of panic mixed with the physical strain, but I kept going until I felt I couldn't anymore. From the other room, I could hear the muffled sounds of Sarah asking, "Lily? Are you all right in there?" I didn't answer, my focus solely on what the operator had told me. I kept drinking water, kept trying to clear whatever I had ingested from my system. Stumbling out of the bathroom, my hands still trembling and my heart pounding, I found Sarah and Susan waiting anxiously. Their faces were etched with concern, or in Susan's case, something that flickered suspiciously like fear. "I need quiet right now," I managed to say, my voice hoarse from the ordeal. "Please, just, no questions." Without waiting for their response, I pulled out my phone and dialed Jack. His voice was a lifeline as I recounted the terrifying discovery and my subsequent actions. "I'm calling the police, Lily," he said firmly. "Stay there. They'll be with you shortly." The moment Susan heard the word police, her face lost all color. "You're making a scene over nothing," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're just trying to get attention." "Enough, Susan." Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. "What did you give to Lily?" "Just paracetamol, Mom," Susan replied, her voice shaky, eyes darting around nervously. "Nothing harmful." I cut in, my patience worn thin. Then explained the chemotherapy drugs in the trash. "That's not paracetamol." Susan's eyes widened, and she made a move toward the kitchen, perhaps to hide or dispose of the evidence, but it was too late. The sound of sirens filled the air, and within moments, police officers were at the door. I told them everything, from the suspicious pill to my alarming discovery. They listened intently, taking notes, their expressions grim. One officer held up the package of medication I had found. "We'll need to check this for fingerprints," he said, sealing it in an evidence bag. Susan stood by, pale and silent. When the ambulance arrived, I was whisked away to the hospital for a thorough medical examination, leaving the house under a cloud of unanswered questions and unspoken accusations. Over the next couple of days, the police worked swiftly. Susan was detained after her fingerprints were found all over the medication packaging. During the interrogation, she initially stuck to her story, claiming, "I just touched those meds when I was in Dad's room once." But Sarah dismantled her defense with a few cold facts. "Those drugs were always kept in a locked cabinet," she told the police, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. Susan never went in there until that day. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Susan finally broke down and confessed. "I just wanted to make sure the inheritance was secure. I didn't think it would go this far," she sobbed, her facade crumbling. The confession was a small solace in the storm of emotions. Betrayal, fear, and relief mingled within me, leaving me exhausted but grateful that the truth had come to light. As the dust settled from the whirlwind of police investigations and hospital visits, more shocking revelations came to light, each one more unbelievable than the last. It turned out that Susan had never been pregnant at all. She had fooled everyone with a prosthetic belly, plotting to eventually adopt a child from another state to pass off as her own. Her plan was to secure her share of her father's inheritance under false pretenses. Her husband, Rick, was blindsided by the deception. "I don't understand how she could do this," he confessed to me one afternoon, his voice heavy with betrayal. "She kept saying intimacy could harm the baby, so I believed her. I listened, offering a sympathetic ear, though inside, my emotions were a tangled mess of relief and anger. Relief that my baby was safe and anger at the lengths Susan had gone to. Thankfully, the doctors confirmed that my quick actions had prevented any harm to my unborn child. The relief that flooded through me was indescribable. Jack and I held each other in the hospital, our bond deepening in the face of adversity, our future as a family looking bright again. However, Susan's fate took a darker turn. She was convicted of attempting to harm me and sentenced to 3 years in prison. At Sarah's insistence, the courts also adjusted George's will, effectively disinheriting Susan. This meant she could no longer claim any part of her father's estate, regardless of any future children she might have. The fallout was severe. Sarah, heartbroken but resolute, distanced herself from her daughter, focusing on healing the family that remained. Rick, feeling betrayed and disgusted, filed for divorce and cut all ties with Susan. A few months later, our little bundle of joy arrived, a beautiful, healthy daughter who was the spitting image of Jack. Holding her in my arms, every struggle seemed worth it to reach this moment of pure happiness. We decided to save the inheritance money for her education and any future siblings she might have. But peace was short-lived. Shortly after Susan's release, she reached out to me, her voice desperate over the phone. "Lily, I know I've made mistakes, but I need help. The inheritance, I don't have anything left." I held the phone tightly, my other hand instinctively cradling my daughter, who was nestled against my chest. "Susan, after everything that happened, I can't do this. I have to think about my family now." Without waiting for her response, I ended the call and blocked her number. Jack stood by the doorway, having overheard the conversation. He walked over and put his arm around us. "Are you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowed in concern. "Yeah, I am now," I replied, gazing down at our daughter who gurgled happily, oblivious to the complexities around her. "Good, because we're all that matters. You, me, her, and any future little ones. We're a family, and nothing's going to change that," he said, kissing the top of our daughter's head gently. As we stood there, a family united, the weight of the past seemed to lift, leaving room only for the future we would build together, a future filled with love, security, and the promise of new beginnings.